It is interesting how every single country in the Anglosphere has had very high levels of Indian migration in the last few years. And this has not been voted for by any of these populations. In fact, in my country, it's been voted against in every election and referendum since 1974. And in America, last time around, you can be pretty sure that the National Conservative contingent of MAGA did not vote for more H-1B visas. However, Donald Trump yesterday, it might have been 2 days ago now. No, it was yesterday. In an interview with Laura Ingraham on Fox News, decided to misread the room and alienate his base, and thereby prompt the need for a chimp out. And the reason I'm discussing this is not just because I would like my American friends on the other side of the Atlantic to have a wonderful country, not just for the selfish reasons that I can visit it, but because I do love America, I have many American friends, and you guys deserve to be a thriving sovereign state at the center of the global empire, whether or not you decide to keep running that. But also because the phrase trust the plan and always chimp, that was not coined by Ron McIntyre, I don't believe, but has been popularized by him, is a tactic that we need to use across our respective countries, because we have to force issues that politicians don't want to talk about, and we have to kick our concerns up the chain to high office, because we know that there are people in the American State Department, in the Trump administration, even Vice President Vance, who watch their Twitter feeds keenly and do actually take action according to what the base wants. And at the moment, lots of people are not wearing a got what I voted for ribbon, but they are wearing a fooled again ribbon. And we hope that that ribbon doesn't stay on for very long. Because if this issue isn't sorted, that of the revolving door of cheap foreign labour and the demographic dispossession of heritage Americans from their own homeland, the same goes for Brits and Australians, of course, then we don't get to have countries anymore. And so this is the issue. And that's why people have erupted over the H-1B visa issue, because President Trump, during his interview with Laura Ingraham, said that Americans just aren't talented enough anymore, and so they have to continue the H-1B program, which results in bringing millions of Indians, basically indentured servants, cheap foreign workers from overseas, to replace American jobs, especially in the tech sector, and, as we will see, in trucking. And let's just say that this is an unalloyed economic good. Let's, for the sake of argument, say that all of these people are rocket scientists and entrepreneurs and irreplaceable engineers, and that for some reason they can't do that in India. Let's just say that there is this untapped ore vein of economic opportunity that for some reason has not made India a superpower to surpass America, and that they can only do it in America. Let's just say that for the sake of argument. Even if they are economically prosperous, the GDP isn't worth it. Because, as we'll go through, the effect of a foreign culture that isn't just Islam, of course, the effect of Indian culture, be it Hinduism, be it Sikhism, be it just the lack of civic sense in India, does not recreate the high-trust Anglo cultures of America, Australia, and Britain. And this is actually explained to us, as we'll get onto, by not just Indians who live there and are frustrated by their countrymen's lack of civic sense, but I actually asked an Indian friend to explain why this is the case, and he provided a lot of novel insights that I'm just going to read to you later. But first, look, let's listen to President Trump. Let's hear him out, and let's go through why H-1Bs are just a complete disaster for America.
Republicans have to talk about it.
And does that mean the H-1B visa thing will not be a big priority for your administration? Because if you want to raise wages for American workers, you can't flood the country with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of foreign workers.
You also do have to bring in talent. When
we have plenty of talented people
no, you
here.
don't. No, you don't.
We don't have talented people here?
No, you don't have you don't have certain talents, and people have to learn. You can't take people off an unemployment line and say, I'm going to put you into a factory where we're going to make missiles, or I'm going to put you.
How did we ever do it before?
Well,
I'll
give you an example. In Georgia, they raided because they wanted illegal immigrants out. They had people from South Korea that made batteries all their lives. You know, making batteries are very complicated. It's not an easy thing and very dangerous. A lot of explosions, a lot of problems. They had like 500 or 600 people, early stages, to make batteries and to teach people how to do it. Well, they wanted them to get out of the country. You're going to need that, Laura. I mean, I know you and I disagree on this. You can't just say a country's coming in, going to invest $10 billion to build a plant, and going to take people off an unemployment line who haven't worked in 5 years, and they're going to start making missiles. It doesn't work that way.
Is it America First to replace your illegal alien indentured servants with legal Indian indentured servants? Is this what you voted for, chat? If you're over in the Atlantic, is this what you voted for? Down in the comments if you're watching this on catch up. Is this what you voted for? Because I don't think any of the patriots who cast their vote enthusiastically for Trump for the third time in 2024 thought, you know what the founding fathers wanted? To replace Ohio steelworkers and Silicon Valley coders with Indians. Now, of course, the argument will be, well, if they come over legally, if they contribute to taxes, if they assimilate into the culture, they're as American as you and me. And as we will see through a number of prominent examples that I'm going to cite throughout this, namely Dinesh D'Souza, Harmeet Dillon, and Vivek Ramaswamy, even the most high-profile, assimilated, wealthy, apparently constitutionally sound Indians in the Republican Party go to bat for their co-ethnics on instinct and denigrate American culture, insult Americans, and lobby for importing more, even though they have had all of the opportunities and prerequisite civic lessons beforehand. And so you must ask, is it worth it? No. And also, whose loyalty is the government to? It is to those whose ancestors built the country, offloaded its prosperity to the present generation. Democracy, as Chesterton said, or it might be Burke's comments on tradition, they have a lot of synergy. It is a contract between the living, the dead, and those yet to be born. And the point is that you have inherited prosperity through the sacrifices of your ancestors, and so you're meant to honor those sacrifices. And so, if the government just brings in lots of foreign labor to dilute your purchasing power, makes you compete with a global labor market, introduces a ethno-nepotistic culture in what is meant to be a colorblind meritocracy, who can also, of course, exploit the DEI laws in various corporations and embed it in the Civil Rights Act, then it rigs the game against heritage Americans. It prices them out of their own cities and hometowns, and it means that they've gone to college and learned all of this expertise in universities far better than the schools in accredit these coders and truck drivers. It means that they spent all that money for nothing. And so it's extra insulting, for example, when the Trump administration turns around and says, here's a 50-year mortgage, it's going to make it easier for you to get a home. Well, that might make the payments slightly less per month, but it means, yet again, that if the average age of home ownership is 40, you're going to be paying that off till you're 90 if you live that long. And in the meantime, while they're importing more cheap foreign labor, people who need a place to live, then that's going to keep house prices going up. So you're competing with the entire world for job opportunities, for housing. And when people say, well, how did we used to do this in the past? Aren't Americans themselves good enough to fill these jobs? Donald Trump, of all people, turns around and says, well, you know, they just don't have the skills. I don't buy it. I'm sorry, I don't buy it. Especially when the qualifications are unverifiable and inferior to those made in America. Products are better, made in America, even if they're more expensive. And let's say this is an unalloyed economic good. Is it worth paying a higher price for goods if you can retain your culture and not have your home filled with mercantile strangers. Because the word economy comes from oikos. Oikos is Greek for home. And so our countries are not shopping malls, they're not sports teams, they're not retail parks. They're not corporations. They are homes filled with family members, and the members of a family are irreplaceable. If you swapped out my brother or sister with an Indian, I might notice. And so, the idea that you can just interchange Americans with anyone from around the world and the country remains the same, or even the economy, which rests on a series of demographic and cultural givens, will remain as prosperous, is laughable. See Wade Stotts' video about low-trust cultures being introduced via the internet, via the global village, and the level of scams being run out of India and Bangladesh and Pakistan on high-trust Anglo cultures, siphoning off their wealth. It's just not worth it. And so you can predict the response from MAGA from this, and they're quite right. This was this account saying Trump is very out of touch, and that we need to relitigate the Christmas Eve H-1B debate again. Don't worry, we'll get onto Vivek later. He's even lost Logan Hall. I feel like the George Bush meme of leaning into the president's ear. Mr. President, we lost Logan Hall. And he's quite right. Where was the H-1B talent in this particular photo? When Americans, and we believe the moon landings here because moon landing denial is anti-white. When Americans got to the moon, they did it with a couple of graph calculators and a pencil. And you're telling me that we need to replace American labor, British and Australian as well, with lots of Indians? Don't agree, I'm afraid. I don't buy into this. And this is why Oron has ordered a all-out chimp out. Because this cannot stand. Trump also said in the same interview that you need 600,000 Chinese students because they bring a lot of money to the economy and they therefore prop up historically black colleges. Chat, again, did you vote to bring in hundreds of thousands of potential Chinese spies to prop up historically black colleges? Was that MAGA? Is that America First? To train the sons and daughters of the CCP in the top engineering schools like MIT, just to subsidize failing predominantly black colleges so that, when it comes time to campaign, Trump can get up and say all he's done for the black community and he's the best president for black people since Abraham Lincoln, while of course neglecting to address his core voter base, which is heterosexual white men who are put at the back of the queue, or bus, as the analogy may be, in their own country via various DEI bits of legislation, culture, and the Civil Rights Act. Is that what you voted for, chat? I'm seeing plenty of no's so far. That's about right. Now, when even Batya Ungasagon is outflanking Trump on immigration, this requires a chimp out. Batya Ungasagon, as some people may know, I have had coarse words with in the past when she suggested that the West is a, quote, Judeo-Christian Muslim worldview, one of the most incoherent sentences I've ever heard, and said that citizenship is a sacred right, therefore we can't deport Pakistani paedophiles who participated in the grooming gangs. So when someone as incoherent as that is making more sense on immigration than Donald Trump, it's time for a chimp out. Pretty serious stuff. I've got a video coming up that I've still got to shoot, but I'm scripting, on Batya Ungasagon's claim from last week or the week before that Jews built the American left, by the way. So she's not exactly the most prudent person on messaging, but even she sounds better here than Donald Trump on immigration. Very worrying. This is one of the ones I liked as well. Cassandra MacDonald, former producer from Timcast, said, can someone show him the Poop Festival video? And, well, it's in the comments there. I'm gonna obscure that. But let's hear from our India correspondent in question, Tyler Oliviera. Patriot. Good man. Quite. What is going on here? Because Tyler, of course, and I'll have another video coming out on this soon, just went to India to experience the Diwali festival. He went to a remote Indian village. And it was called... The festival was called Gorehaba. And it celebrated an Indian village called Gunmatapura. And despite just being a man with a GoPro filming Indians in their natural habitat, he got thousands of spam calls and death threats and slanderous pieces written about him in the Indian press. It's a trend that we're going to see going on here. Remember that everyone that he filmed throwing excrement at each other, eating it and claiming it cures cancer, drinking cow urine, remember that via H-1Bs, or skilled worker visas in the UK, the borders of the Anglosphere are open to these people. I don't think that's a very sensible idea. Do you? So, Oliveira also pointed this out. America landed on the moon 20 years before the H-1B program even existed. Don't give us bullshit about America not having enough talent. Abolish the H-1B program and invest in American youth, not foreigners. It's a strange time when Tyler Oliviera sounds more America First than President Trump. And again, I'm not saying, as some people have said, MAGA is over. We've been misled. It was all a containment operation. Not saying that. What tends to happen is when politicians, especially boomers who all have a ceiling on how base they can be, enter a system and they trust that the system is honest and has no perverse incentives, they end up getting captured by procedure. And so clearly someone has told President Trump, look, in the run-up to the midterms, you're going to go through economic hardship if you decide to cut the number of H-1B visas or the number of Chinese students. So, you know, it's a trade-off. I'm sorry, but there's going to be teething problems, or rather withdrawal pangs, if America is going to take itself off of the recreational drug of cheap foreign labor and funny money printed by the Federal Reserve. It's necessary. And if someone needs to do it, it's probably Donald Trump, who isn't running again. And I understand there's a government shutdown going on right now, and there isn't exactly a very compliant Congress or Senate at the moment. But if someone can make the most of his slim majority before the midterms to do necessary things that his base wants, it needs to be Donald Trump. Oliver has been consistently right on this. We must reclaim America from the boomers who have sold our country to the highest bidders and relish in our generation's poverty. Their opinion is no longer relevant. They lived an easy life and have failed to position their grandchildren to do the same. Reject gerontocracy. Nayland Haley said the same. The young right is inevitable because of the mistakes that the boomers themselves have been making, and who are unrepentant for doing so. And it's interesting that he quotes Bill Mitchell here. Bill Mitchell has been always a massive anti-Trump Republican. And he's saying, remember the last time MAGA lost its mind over H-1Bs? So Christmas. What did that achieve? Nothing. It weakened us. The left is more than happy to sit by and watch us shoot ourselves in the foot. Do not repeat the same mistake. I might be thinking of the other one. The former congressman who's anti-Trump Republican. The one who they called an aging lesbian. Because this guy, if he's masquerading as MAGA, how is mass importing endless numbers of Indians pro-American? So Mitchell decided to run this poll, and of course I voted in it. I stand with President Trump 100% on his H-1B policies. Who's with me? The base despise this. You've misread the room. And the only people supporting this are either the boomercons or never-Trumpers who have consistently preached free market economics, which has failed to materialize. And none example better, especially this week, than Ben Shapiro. Now, I am going to play this clip from Shapiro's show, and then provide some context as to when in the show this clip came along, and when it was broadcast. Because if anyone saw my video yesterday on Ben Shapiro's comments on trigonometry, it's pretty important to contrast his support for H-1Bs for telling young Americans who can't afford to live in the towns they were brought up in, well, if you can't afford it, buy a house somewhere else.
There are, in fact, certain positions in the United States that require a level of expertise that may not be reachable in the numbers that are currently being churned out by American universities. That is a shortcoming of our educational system, and it is a problem. And so you can say we should up our game. I agree. We should absolutely up our game educationally. But in the meantime, if you do not bring in the labor supply, particularly to tech, tech will go find the labor supply. And so what you will end up with is an office that was employing 30 Americans and 3 H-1B visa people. If the costs grow too high, simply moving to another country where they hire 30 Indians and 0 Americans.
Just pause there. The 3 H-1B visas to 30 Americans, not very common. What ends up happening is Indians get hired in the company, brought over into the country. They ascend up the ranks, whether they were born in America or not, actually. And when they become CEOs or executive level positions or in charge of hiring, they fire Americans. And this has happened in British firms too. I spoke to a taxi driver who used to work on naval engineering and was sacked and replaced with Indians by an Indian boss. They fire the American workers and then they hire cheaper co-ethnics from India overseas. And so it's not a Hobson's choice being presented here by Shapiro to say, well, you either hire loads of Indians in your country and replace your labor, or the companies go to India and just hire Indians there. Okay, it's a Hobson's choice, but let's say that is the binary choice. Okay, let them go to India, because the GDP is worth sacrificing, especially in an economy propped up entirely by debt, with trillions of dollars in debt to service, so it's a totally unsustainable system anyway, besides the point. It is better to have Indians working in India than Indians working as Indians in America, because people are not just fungible economic widgets who slot into a country like cogs in a great big machine. They bring the baggage of their homelands with them. They bring their ethno-nepotism, they bring their customs and habits, they bring their lack of civic sense, they bring their incompatible culture with the Anglo-Protestant, or at least Christian, heritage of the United States. And so, if the companies are so desperate for cheap labor that they will go to India, allow them to go to India. Instead, I'm sure there are lots of enterprising Americans who will start their own startups, considering America does have this pull yourself up by your bootstraps entrepreneurial culture, who will, by virtue of being more ingenuitive and hardworking, will immediately outpace the companies that have betrayed America and outsourced all their labor to India. Someone sent a super chat. We have enough highly capable young people to fill expert positions, but we are allocating them to the wrong places. We don't need more HR people and bureaucrats. Keep up the good work. I mean, that's true as well. Pretty much all HR and a lot of legal compliance is a result of government regulation. So if the Trump administration wanted to cut costs for businesses headquartered in America, they could slash all of that regulation. They could cut all of those henpecking make-work jobs that don't need to exist, and that don't exist, which actually lowers the cost of labor and doing business in those other countries. They could just, allow the spirit of masculine competition to reign again, rather than the institutionalized femininity that Helen Andrews, wasn't it, wrote about recently in Compact magazine. Anyway, I'll let Ben continue digging the grave for his credibility.
Right, this is the problem with the reason companies offshore is not because it's easy or fun to simply move your company somewhere else. It's because the labor cost becomes so prohibitive in the United States that companies move away. And you can try to tariff them back, but all that does is artificially raise the price on Americans. Again, we're talking about affordability. There are trade-offs in economics. Autarky comes with the fun feeling that everybody in America is making American product. It comes with the very large downside that your products are economically inefficient, they don't work as well, and you're not globally competitive. Right? All policies have trade-offs. It is also better for the American people, broadly speaking, to bring in the best from other countries. Now, how do you determine the best? You can make, again, the case that the H-1B visa program is fatally flawed. It's not bringing in enough of the best. I will point out that many of our best founders in the United States are either immigrants or the children of immigrants who came in on H-1B visas, or who came in just generally without an H-1B visa through other forms of legal immigration, as students. And the reality is that maybe our screening procedures should be different, but we need to see specifics on what the screening procedures you're applying are that would allow for there to be, for example, an Elon Musk American citizen creating tens of thousands of jobs.
Use O1 visas for that. Use O1 visas. The O1 visas exist for the purpose of importing those exceptional individuals like Elon Musk. If India was full of millions of Elon Musks, it wouldn't be India. If more Indians was a solution to all of America's economic woes, then India would have surpassed America economically a very long time ago. If India were capable of solving America's problems, then India itself would have no problems. countries are the way they are because of the vast majority of people who live in them. And so, the more people you import from a country, the less you turn those people into your countrymen, and the more you turn their country, your country, into theirs. And I don't think it's MAGA to force heritage Americans to live in India. I don't think it's MAGA to replace American companies with Indian CEOs. Because in this clip, Ben cites, in a second, the new CEO of Google and the new CEO of Microsoft, Sundar Pichai, Satya Nadella. Do you notice that they aren't the founders of those companies? They've inherited those companies. And how are those companies doing under them, by the way? Not nearly as well as they were compared to their startups in the 90s. People complain about their services, the censoriousness of them, the fact that they have, yet again, fired and rehired staff that just so happen to share their ethnic background. So, is this a good thing for Americans? No. Now, I pulled up this clip because this is in the same podcast where Ben Shapiro defends his comments on trigonometry, telling people if you can't afford to live in a city, maybe you should move to a cheaper one. Ben, do you happen to think there might be a downward pressure placed on property prices, the availability of housing, and of jobs that pay well enough to make housing affordable if you import millions of Indians? Do you think that might be a problem? Because you didn't mention it during your trigonometry episode when you explained the solutions to housing affordability in New York. And the fact that you still don't draw that connection is why the unrealized promises of neoliberal economics, the invisible hand allocating to everyone their allotted share of largesse through raw effort and meritocracy, that is why it has led to Zoran Mamdani's racial socialism in New York, but also America First protectionism that says we don't need to compete in our respective countries with a global labor market, pricing our people out of their ancestral lands, and treating everyone as if they are swappable economic units, when actually every single person brings a culture with them. Economies rest on culture, and if you change the culture, you impoverish the economy and you render the country unrecognizable. The fact that this isn't acknowledged, when instead the promises of sort of Reagan-era Chicago school economics have been, well, you can outsource manufacturing, but don't worry, you'll get cheaper goods. Well, you can globalize the labor supply, but we need to fill skill shortages. Well, we can move away from manufacturing, but we can move towards creative, financial services, and knowledge economy industries, which we then centralize in cities, which inadvertently make you move away from your family into a city in order to access the job opportunities. Oh, and you need to go to a university and technically specialize in order to get that, even though we'll treat foreign qualifications from inferior universities as equivalent to your own. And it just so happens that those cities and those universities generate the same kind of progressives that Ben used to debate, obviously on college campuses, but now complains are being ascendant in these cities in their politics based on the grievance of people not owning anything. Oh, and also, if you import people from overseas because the labor is cheaper and you have a global labor pool and you're treating their qualifications as equivalent even though they're not, of course those people need somewhere to live, so that's going to drive up the cost of housing for you living near those job opportunities. And even if you were born and raised there, and of course your family's been there for hundreds of years, for generations, well, the fact that our economic policies have basically priced you out of your own home, you could just move. Oh, okay, well, you'll move to somewhere else with more job opportunities? Too bad, we replace you with Indians there too. And do you see why people were annoyed about what you said? H-1Bs are not America First. This shouldn't surprise anyone. And the worst take on this, of course, was from James Lindsay. Now, I've got James Lindsay muted, as you can see, because James Lindsay is the kind of man who defecates in his pants and then mocks everyone else for not smelling it and saying it reeks of roses. James Lindsay's saying that if you say America is for Americans, as in a distinct group with a shared heritage, language, culture, and identity, you know, the definition, I think it was John Adams used, or it might have been John Jay, for what a nation is. So what the founding fathers considered Americans to be. You're literally Hitler. Wow, I've never heard someone make that insightful comparison before. Subscribe to new discourses, I suppose. You do realize that the Second World War is not a gravity well around which all philosophy and historical events must orbit for all time. There are other reference points and philosophies in history. And that having a preference for your people, your culture, demanding the state have a loyalty to the people who have inherited it and whose ancestors built it over any other who will not reproduce a civilization is not literally the Nazis. So, profoundly unimpressive. But this is the kind of defense that inadvertently Trump has allied himself with by pushing H-1Bs. It's calling everyone to the right of yesterday's left a Nazi, saying that if you get replaced by Indians in your job or priced out of your ancestral home, you should just move elsewhere. And overall unpopularity, because people realize that you're importing millions of people from a country that don't share your traditions, don't share your faith, and that fling poo at each other in the aftermath of Diwali. Not great. Super Chat's just said, the big issue I have with education just means college. Trade schools and boot camps and autodidacts get screwed by H-1Bs. I couldn't get into college due to cost. Yeah. Also, lots of these jobs are going to be swallowed up by AI soon anyway, and so you're going to have a lot of paperwork Americans milling about in the system with very little to do. And the Indians recognize that that's going to be a problem for them, which is why they're trying to disperse their population across the globe, but we'll get onto that in a moment. So why are H-1Bs a problem? I couldn't believe this stat when I read it. Over 70% of H-1B holders are Indian citizens. Okay, so the H-1B system is just a way for Indians to move to America. The purpose of the system is what it does. The purpose of H-1Bs is to mass import Indians into the United States. You could just say no. Like, any country at any time can shut its doors to anyone for any period of time, and there are very good arguments to say that we should be doing that. The Anglos should be doing that entirely. Now, I would say there should be some reciprocity to population exchange between heritage Americans, Australians, and Englishmen, even just for visiting, because we do have a lot in common. We are kindred spirits and cousins, after all. But permanent settlement, especially from the third world, are you insane? And overall, the numbers here. So the Indian citizens were 71% of H-1B visa recipients, according to the US Citizenship and Immigration Services. They're the largest beneficiary group by far. Chinese nationals were the second at 12%. Again, Chinese nationals being members of a country that the US, Australia, and the UK consider a strategic enemy because they commit industrial-scale espionage, they steal our intellectual property, they debase their own currency, they are buying up various African countries across the Belt and Road and trying to create a sort of parallel colonial empire to the US. And yet, America is importing their nationals and allowing them to be the beneficiaries of American jobs and education. 12% is bad enough. 71% are Indian. And that's because they're taking advantage of the lottery system by running visa mills over in India. Why are you allowing this? You know it's going on. Question, why do Indians want to do this? If they're also highly skilled, why do Indians not want to keep this GDP rocket fuel? Well, it's because the Indian economy is becoming increasingly reliant on remittances. And people are saying, oh, reliant? Don't be ridiculous. It's only about 3% of their total economy. Okay. If we get 0.3% GDP growth in a year, now, we count that as a win because our economies are so poor. If you took 3% of the Indian economy by, I don't know, taxing remittances at very high rates, as Senator Eric Schmidt suggested, you would get a lot more conciliatory, less exploitative action by India really quickly. Why is America, Britain, Australia the piggy bank for the third world, especially India? Like, Nigeria's economy is very reliant on remittances. I recommend you read my friend Harrison Pitt's mass deportations paper for Restore Britain for more information on that. But Indians are gloating. This is the Indian press. Don't worry, we'll be referencing the Indian press a lot because the way that Indians project themselves on the world stage is very telling. The Indian diaspora sent home $135.46 billion in the last fiscal year. That's the highest one on record. They were 14% higher than the previous year. They have the biggest recipient of diaspora remittances for more than a decade. It's doubled in 8 years from 61 billion in 2016. Remittances accounted for over 10% of the gross current account inflows of 1 trillion during the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2025. We are having our wealth siphoned off, at times of record debt for our countries, into India. Why? We don't need any of this. The money is not staying in the American economy. The fact that more money is changing hands means the GDP graph is going up, but are things getting better for Americans? I mean, GDP per capita is falling precipitously in Britain, and we have had 1 million Indians in 4 years, 250,000 every year. And guess what? The average wage of Indians is now falling below that of Brits, because we are importing Indian peasants to do cheap jobs like delivery driving. I saw that there were 7-Eleven staff on the list of H-1B visas. Is that high-skilled labour? Is that the best and brightest from the rest of the world? No, I would think not. But this is why India wants it, because they are just stealing money from the American economy. And why else they want it as well, and this is a fascinating piece in the Washington Post, is because they know they have a massive excess male population. And when you have a lot of single men milling about in a country with not much to do, few economic opportunities, they're unlikely to get married and reproduce, you tend to have a recipe for political tumult. And so they want their civilizations to be more stable. And they also want to use their diasporas as demographic and thereby democratic pressure in foreign countries as living bridges back to India to advantage India in international politics. There's a $10 super chat here that says, Napoleon said that during revolutionary times, never trust a man over 40. They will simply not be able to grasp the situation. Make of this information as you will. I think that timescale has been accelerated as well by the fact that we exchange information much faster over social media now. And before I get onto the section, all I must say is giving Indians the internet has been an absolute disaster for the global representation and reputation of Indians. Because before, there were kind of positive stereotypes about Indians. I remember Patrice O'Neill in the 90s making jokes that there's nobody tougher actually than Indians because they're the only ones that will run a 7-Eleven or a gas station in the ghetto, work at 3 a.m. with no body armor, and demand that potential Crips and Bloods give them change smaller than a 50 from their drug deal and not worry about getting shot. There was the stereotype, of course, of Apu from The Simpsons. You know, father of octuplets, hard worker, pillar of the community, runs the Quickie Mart, basically an unofficial member of Homer's friend group. Dives in front of Homer to save him from Snake's bullet. And then there was that documentary by that one Indian guy who lives in America that was complaining that Apu was voiced by Hank Azaria, and this is a demeaning stereotype for some reason, despite all of Simpsons characters being stereotypes. And from that point, it just seems that the reputation of Indians, rather than hard-working, family-loving immigrants, has moved to ethno-narcissists with a penchant for littering in public and defecating in the street in their own country. I might have suggested you stuck with Apu. And look, I say all of this because I want everyone's countries to actually improve. Like, I've met quite a few nice Indian Christians over my lifetime. I was just in Hungary a couple of months ago, a couple of nice Pakistani Christians, and I told them, because they actually said they watch my content and agree with me on everything, and I said, look, guys, I hope you end up running your countries, because you seem you seem to have a lot more moral integrity and intelligence than the people currently running it like a third world slum now. And so I really hope that you are educated and forthright and into politics. You know, I've met some really great Christians from Kerala. One of my friends had an adopted sister from India who introduced him to his wife. Again, committed Christians. So there are good people from this country, just unfortunately they're in the minority. And so if you import lots of them, you're not going to get those good people. You're going to get the majority of Indians. And this is the plan from India's government and China's government as well. And in this piece in the Washington Post, it said, out of China's population of 1.4 billion, there are nearly 34 million males than females, the equivalent of almost the entire population of California or Poland, who will never find wives and only rarely have sex. And this is because of the one-child policy. Killed lots of girls, had lots of boys, there's now a drastic imbalance, and so they want to use immigration policy to rectify that troublesome imbalance. India, that has a preference for sons and male heirs, has 37 million excess men. So that's half of Britain. So India could just disperse half of Britain in terms of its men across the globe. Just... You know the Giga Chad with the torch shining up at his face telling a ghost story? That's how I feel right now. In the two countries, 50 million excess males are under age 20. And so this is why when the Trump administration considered pausing H-1Bs, reducing them, or when Senator Eric Schmidt at NatCon said that we should end H-1Bs entirely, this prompted panic calls to the White House and to the State Department. Because India were petrified that their plan to disperse their troublesome, layabout excess male population to then reroute the wealth of the West back home via remittances wasn't going to continue. And we know this is the case because various Indian heritage politicians in Britain have been echoing the Hindutva talking points of Prime Minister Modi. So this is Home Secretary Priti Patel, who oversaw the Boris wave, of course, and remains unrepentant, saying that we still have the best and brightest, you know, despite less than 3% of the Boris wave being doctors and nurses, despite less than 15% of them coming in principally to work, despite less than 5% of them ever being net tax-paying contributors, and despite the fact that none of the British public wanted this mass demographic experiment run on them in the first place. Priti Patel, during this, she mentions that Prime Minister Modi uses the term living bridges to describe the relationship with Indian diasporas in the Anglosphere and their relationship with strengthening ties back at home. There we go. You've mentioned Prime Minister Modi a couple of times. He's the architect of the term living bridge, and effectively usage of the Indian diaspora community around the world, not only in the UK, but more broadly, has helped to strengthen ties with key countries. So just openly saying that Indians are working in foreign countries on behalf of their home government, to advantage their home government, to strengthen ties, basically like getting them better deals by leveraging their demographic presence in the country in democratic politics. Do you think our own Prime Minister understands the significance of the living bridge and why domestically diaspora communities matter when it comes to bilateral relationships? Isn't that curious? So any trade deal with India is basically a poison chalice because they expect you to take more of their citizens who will then enter your politics or become pillars of ethno-nepotistic hiring businesses to then lobby to import more Indians. Actually, here's a weird story. So I found myself, back in the days when I wasn't banned from everything, at a Bangladeshi Catering Association awards dinner because I had frequently appeared on Talk TV and they had invited a bunch of Talk TV guests to their ceremony because Talk had campaigned for keeping restaurants open during COVID. So I went, food was fine, curry's not really my thing. Funnily enough, despite them all being Muslims, they were all drinking Cobra beer. And Paul Scully, the business minister, had been invited. And he was, well, he had had enough Cobra beers to be receptive to their demands, let's put it that way. And during the various dances and speeches, one of the hosts got up and said, this is why we need to liberalize visas even further, because the Bangladeshi catering scene, because they run a lot of curry houses, not actually many Indians in Britain apparently, it's mainly run by Bangladeshis. The curry scene is so thriving that we actually need more servers, more chefs. Now, of course, it's because they all eat at their own curry houses. So, the more Bangladeshis you get, the more demand for curry there is. The more Bangladeshi curry houses are open up. The more Bangladeshis eat at the curry houses, meaning the more curry houses are needed, meaning the more Bangladeshi staff are needed, meaning the more Bangladeshis you have to import, and over and over and over, until you are just battery farming Bangladesh in areas of your country. This also applies for India and Pakistan. Clearly, according to the fact that they know this is happening. So, this has also been spoken about again, she says. When was this? 2020. Our relationship with India is deeply rooted in shared history, culture, and our people-to-people ties. I wonder why Priti Patel thinks this. It is difficult to think of two other countries so deeply intertwined as the living bridge between our nations strengthens. Our partnership for the future is based upon our shared values and determination to be a force for good as we collectively embark upon new challenges and shared opportunities. Rishi Sunak said the same thing, shaking hands with Modi. The leaders reflected on the close and growing ties between the UK and India, exemplified in the living bridge between our people. And then Keir Starmer, soon after becoming Prime Minister, after the election, spoke with Modi. They discussed the importance of the living bridge between the UK and India and the 2030 roadmap. Now, when Keir Starmer cut a trade deal with India, much like the H-1B visas in America, it created stipulations for new Indian visas for jobs that Brits obviously couldn't do, yoga instructors, curry chefs, and musicians. So we needed more people busking with sitars on the London Underground, apparently. We were in dire shortage of Vindaloo chefs, despite Wetherspoons being the #1 curry provider in the country. All they want to do, India, is disperse their excess male population around the world so they can reroute your wealth via remittances back home and use their diasporas to lobby in your politics for importing more Indians. And so the H-1B visa system is just a tool for the Indian government to influence American politics. Why on earth would President Trump want that to continue? How is that beneficial for Americans? I don't think it is at all. And then, in response to this, Ice Barbie, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, isn't she the one that says some really weird things in her book and had to say, well, I actually never met with Kim Jong-un in the first place? Very strange appointment. Anyway, she then went on Fox News when she was asked about this and boasted about the fact that the Trump administration is rubber stamping more citizenship grants. That they are making more immigrants permanent residents of the United States. Are you insane? How is this America? Chat, do you think you got what you voted for here? Is this what anyone wanted? Didn't everyone want to denaturalize and deport a lot of people who do not belong in America? Instead, Department of Homeland Security is expediting the citizenship applications of people who will not recreate the American culture and the American homeland. Let's listen.
What is the administration's position on these visas?
Now, we're going to keep using our visa programs. We're just going to make sure that they have integrity, that we're actually doing the vetting of the individuals who come into this country, that they want to be here for the right reasons, that they're not supporters of terrorists and organizations that hate America. And that's what I think is so remarkable is under the Trump administration, we've sped up our process and added integrity to the visa programs, to green cards, to all of that. But also more people are becoming naturalized under this administration than ever before. More people are becoming citizens because we're not just streamlining and building some processes back into our immigration policies. We're also making sure that these individuals that are coming into our country and get that privilege, that they actually are here for the right reasons. The Biden administration let thousands of terrorists into this country. They opened the southern border. They abused our asylum programs, abused our protective programs and visa programs, and we fixed all of it. It's remarkable what President Trump has done, and it's because he's a great leader. He's a visionary, and this man is going to go down as a legend in history as our greatest president ever.
I wish that were true. But if President Trump leads to thousands more Indians becoming naturalized citizens in America, his legacy will be as tarnished as Ronald Reagan's was by mass amnesty turning California permanently blue. People don't want this. And by the way, and again, this is me stepping on a third rail, but have I not annoyed everyone? Someone tell the Republican Party that there are more criteria for hating America than anti-Semitism. Because a lot of senators, a lot of congresspeople are very concerned about campus anti-Semitism because of the Hamas encampments ever since October the 7th. Who's the leader of the Columbia protest? Khalil something that they couldn't deport. Now, look, I think deport him because he's in favor of Hamas, who would happily commit the same atrocities against Christian infidels as they did against Jews in Israel, if given half the chance. Mahmoud Khalil, that's it. But he shouldn't have been in there in the first place, regardless of whether he's mean to Jews. his culture and his religion and his politics are not going to recreate America. They're not going to lead to flourishing. And you shouldn't have to retroactively guess whether or not they're going to be mean to Christians or Jews after they've already set foot in your country. You can just look at the country and say, highly unlikely that these people are going to be compatible with our civilization. No, thank you. For some reason, it only matters when people transgress against Jewish students on campus or say nasty things about Israel. I think that being mean about the American people or just not participating in their culture and recreating your country should be criteria to exclude people enough. For some reason, though, people are getting expedited citizenship grants, and so, presumably, unless you're willing to denaturalize and deport, which they aren't even willing to do with Ilhan Omar, who says that Somalia is her homeland, that Somalian president is her president, not President Trump. She said she wouldn't even mind being deported back to Somalia, has probably committed immigration fraud by marrying her brother, and who celebrated the death of Charlie Kirk, or at least excused it by listing off all of the things she thought he said were reprehensible. Also, euphemized 9/11 as some people did something, and then depicted Muslims as the real victims. Like the old Norman MacDonald joke. If you can't even denaturalize and deport her, don't you think you should get your house in order before giving more people citizenship grants? Nobody voted for this. Nobody voted for hundreds of thousands of cheap Indian workers to come over on H-1B visas. Terrible idea. I think it's partially because of this. Now, this is Laura Trump speaking at an American Hindu-Jewish Congress gala in Mar-a-Lago. This was October the 30th. Dedicated to combating anti-Semitism and anti-Hindu prejudice. Lynn Patton, the White House Director of Minority Outreach and Deputy Assistant to President Trump, also spoke at the event. Now, one of the reasons I think this is happening, actually, and this is one of my insights from the Israel trip that I went on. Again, people that think that I shouldn't have gone on that, it was pretty useful to understand things. One of the speakers at the trip was explaining that Israel was cutting a deal with India to ensure more technology and more workers are traded back and forth between their countries to guarantee the safe passage of ships through shipping lanes around the Indian Ocean. Because, of course, the Houthis occupying the Strait of Hormuz caused some concern about the ability for jihadist groups to block up shipping lanes in the Middle East, especially the Suez Canal. And so they're finding alternative arrangements. So I think a lot of the Indian migration that Trump is unwilling to cut, a lot of the Jewish-Hindu joint lobbying group efforts are trying to sweeten the deal and sort of butter up the other side to ensure that this realpolitik deal goes through. And I just don't think it's worth it. I think, again, pursue the promise that J.D. Vance and the labor movement joining MAGA made, which is repatriate manufacturing, rely on yourselves for energy, and if it takes a slight hike in prices, which, to be honest, you're going to have to experience some economic hardship to get the debt under control anyway, it's worth it because you will still remain America. You can recover from economic hardship. You can recover from ideological confusion. You can recover from a spiritual malaise. You cannot recover from demographic replacement. And that is what H-1Bs are. They are not GDP rocket fuel. They are an avenue for just bringing over lots of Indians to America to recreate India. Bad idea. So, why do people have such negative opinions of Indians these days? Because this is something that I have noticed. It's pretty commonplace on X to make some rather insulting stereotypes of Indians. And I think it's because, like I said in a previous video about the third world ruining conspiracy theories, there's been a noticeable influx of people from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh coming onto platforms like X, Reddit, not that I use Reddit, but it gets reposted on X, YouTube, in recent years. This sort of started with the PewDiePie feud with T-Series and all the threats that he got for making some funny songs about Indians. Well, now, because of the presence of Indian diasporas, because of their involvement in politics, because of their catching up to how the social media game is played, including with some rather acerbic anons on X, the presence of Indians and their culture and their way of behaving and what they think about us has become a lot more salient. This is especially present whenever someone in Britain complains about mass migration, and you get Indian accounts gloating vindictively about immigration being a punishment for colonialism, saying that we stole trillions of pounds in wealth from India that was presumably buried under the dirt. At least I hope it's dirt. And so you get these sort of ethnic antagonisms that are naturally arising from just different ethnicities and cultures interacting online, and it's very revealing about what other people think of us, especially considering our borders are basically open to that part of the world. And this exchange, more than any in recent weeks, summed up the fatigue setting in Christendom, in the West, in the Anglosphere, with having to put up with one-sided ethnic narcissism from the subcontinent. Again, know plenty of nice Indians, not targeting you, don't take it personally. But this is a very real thing. And so I would encourage Indians who want to fix their country and want to save their failing reputation to discourage this, to sort of correct people on your own side with whom you have a bit of credibility with. And this woman fit the archetype of like the Hermione Granger character, you know, the very conceited, know-it-all, bookish girl who condescends you with her presumed superior knowledge and takes up a lot of your time. But it just codes slightly differently as well when there's the ethnic dimension and when there's the lecturing of the Vice President of the United States that collectively you know, Americans as an ethnic group, as a people, owe her and other immigrants, specifically Indian immigrants, something because they made the promise that you were party to American opportunities, their largesse and their wealth. And suddenly when people think that they're getting a raw end of the deal, how dare you even think about rescinding that?
Vice President, thank you so much for giving this opportunity to talk here today. I did not agree with many of the things that you said right ahead of this, but I don't think that's my point to discuss here. What I want to ask is, you are married to a woman who is not Christian. In her Wikipedia, I mean, I just looked it up. I wanted to know what her faith was. I didn't know this before, but she still calls herself Hindu. You are raising three kids in interracial, cultural, racial, religious household. How are you maintaining, or how are you teaching your kids not to keep your religion ahead of their mother's religion? Or how are you teaching them that your kind, their dad kind, who got here just few years or few decades ago, is different or is better than your mom's kind, who got here just a generation before? How are you balancing that? And when you talk about too many immigrants here, when did you guys decide that number? Why did you sell us a dream? You made us spend our youth, our wealth in this country and gave us a dream. You don't owe us anything. We have worked hard for it. Then how can you, as a vice president, stand there and say that we have too many of them now and we are going to take them out to people who are here rightfully so by paying the money that you guys asked us? You gave us the path, and now how can you stop it and tell us we don't belong here anymore? And one more thing, I'm sorry, one more thing. Sure. Do you have to
There's a lot there. I don't know if I'm going to remember all this, but yeah, I will try.
I'm sorry. I had to say all of this, and please take it with due, I'm saying all of this with due respect.
Go ahead. Please.
I have no intention of causing a scene here or anything, but...
We're not close to causing a scene, don't worry.
But we talked about Christianity, all of this. I'm not even Christian, and I'm here standing to show support. Why are we making Christianity one of the major things that you have to have in common to be one of you guys, to show that I love America just as much as you do? Why is that still a question? Why do I have to be a Christian?
Okay, so there was a lot there, and I'm going to try to respond to as much of it as I can. So on the question of immigration, So first of all, I can believe that we should have lower immigration levels, but if the United States passed a law and made a promise to somebody, the United States, of course, has to honor that promise. Nobody's talking about that. I'm talking about people who came in violation of the laws of the United States of America, and I'm talking about in the future reducing the number of people. Sorry, what?
May I continue on that? Because when you just said you are not stopping with the people who came here legally, right? But you are pushing out policies that hurt us. And these policies are not even solving the problems. These policies are just creating chaos.
No, ma'am. Okay, so again, I'm gonna finish answering the question, and then if I've answered all 9 of your questions in less than 15 minutes, then we can keep on going.
I'm going to pause it there because she's insufferable. Imagine having the entitlement of having the Vice President of the United States in front of you, being perfectly polite and charming and willing to take audience questions, and going on like a 3-minute rant. And then when he's answering one of your various questions, which are incredibly pointed and personal, by the way, accusing him of having a unsustainable marriage because he is somehow erasing his children's racial and cultural identity, then you interrupt him and presume to continue talking and berating him for not allowing millions more immigrants, presumably from your home country and culture, to come in, and then lecturing him on whether or not he's allowed to have an exclusionary identity for his own nation that precludes other faiths which did not build the country from participating in it, when America is a Christian country. That is the reason why you should be a Christian in America. You should be a Christian anyway, because it's objectively true, but you should be a Christian in America because the Founding Fathers, as Milo once joked on Tim Pool's channel, did not base the Bill of Rights and Declaration of Independence on the Talmud or the Bhagavad Gita or the Dead Sea Scrolls. They based it on the Bible, specifically the Gospels and the New Testament. Pretty much all of the states at the founding had established churches. So even though there wasn't an established church, or rather, Congress didn't make an establishment of religion, as in one of the Christian denominations, because they were pursuing disestablishmentarianism, because they were breaking away from the crown, and thereby the Anglican Church, because the monarch is the head of the church. Just because they didn't do all of those things as a matter of procedure did not mean that the Founding Fathers had Hinduism in mind when they were trying to make peace between the various warring denominations that they fled from England and Europe. So imagine having this level of arrogance, and this level of arrogance, if it were being shamed rather than championed by this particular Indian X account and other accounts that we'll see in a moment, then it would be understandable. But instead, this is seen as a win for Indians as a collective, both in and outside of the United States, because they recognize that they're actively lobbying to dilute the American identity and demand more immigration because it advantages India and thereby Indians. There's a €10 super chat here. Most people I know will be fine with more hardship in terms of economic hardship if you have to, keep all of these high-skill immigrants who have no qualms with American culture, ethnic baggage at all out of your country. I know I'll be fine with more hardship. They cannot afford real property anyway. It's the boomer propaganda that is effective. Who will wipe your behind when you're old? Look at the levels of abuse in nursing homes admitted by nursing home workers, according to the World Health Organization. I think it was 2 in 3 admitted to abusing their own patients. So you may not want to fill nursing homes with cheap foreign care workers who barely speak English and do not share your culture, because you might end up being abused by them. Anyway, so this is again, more Indians celebrating it. This guy pointed out, people all over India are praising her right now, not realizing the damage she's done. And that's true. She's become a irritating stereotype. And the fact that Indians are praising this means this is how Indians think they should interact with America, who has more to offer them than India does America. And now J.D. Vance has talked favorably about the 1924 Immigration Act. You can't put that toothpaste back in the tube. Bear in mind, if you had a Congress courageous enough to repeal the 1965 Hart-Celler Act, to repeal Ted Kennedy's 1990s Immigration Act that was passed under George H.W. Bush, if you went back to the settlement before 1965 that had limited levels of immigration from culturally proximate Christian countries in largely Western Europe, this would not just dilapidate economies like India and Nigeria's overnight, who are over-reliant on remittances, but it would vastly improve America. You'd have lower crime, you'd have more money kept in the country, you'd have a higher level of cultural cohesion, and you could maybe start to heal as a country from your identity being under constant attack from the confusion thrown in by ethno-narcissistic lobbyists like this woman. Now, this was a pattern across India. They decided to start attacking J.D. Vance's family because J.D. Vance's wife is, of course, of Indian heritage. I think she's a second-generation immigrant. And there are questions over whether or not she's practicing Hindu. I think J.D. Vance had 2 weddings, if I'm right. There's a photo of him in Indian garb when he was younger, but he's a committed Catholic, and I think he's raising his kids Catholic. She's saying, it doesn't matter if Usha Vance converts or not. Her children are already not Hindu. Erasure of Hindu identity has been programmed. This is the tragedy of the adjusting Hindu, the pliable Hindu, the gracious Hindu. When my daughter told me in college that her best friend, a Christian, told her she always prayed that she would one day embrace Christianity, I knew about this problem. Aha, yes, Christians praying for the salvation of your soul is an attack on Hindu identity. Do you see how there might be some cultural incompatibilities between Indians and Americans here? Says, it's a wonder we Hindus are still standing, still proud, and still holding on to our devatas and our traditions. And there are people still wishing that Usha Vance shows her courage and remains Hindu, basically encouraging conflict within J.D. Vance's marriage. This has 2.5 million views and 11,000 likes. So clearly, there's a lot of support for this from India. And the reason I say there's a lot of support for this from India is because multiple Indian accounts decided to re-upload this exchange with Indian origin woman confronts J.D. Vance, praising her. The Hindu, answering question on migration, amplifying it. Viral, Nepali woman confronts Vance on approach towards legal immigrants and faith. Whenever another random Indian person is either influential in politics or insulted by some complete no-name, as we'll get onto in a moment, the Indian press sort of amplify this out of ethnic solidarity. It's crazy. We don't do this, right? So if let's say an Indian were to insult an Englishman, and of course this is because of our liberal, anti-racist delusions that run through the press, but if a random Indian were to insult a random Englishman, you would not get round-the-clock coverage by the English press saying that this is an endemic example of anti-Hindu, anti-Indian bias. But you do actually get that when Lucy White, and she's a commentator in the UK that you might not be familiar with, when she tweeted that she was walking through Heathrow Airport Terminal 3, went into Marks & Spencer's, and 3 staff were speaking Hindi, and she said, we must confront them every time when they're not speaking English. Now, when she put this out, India Today ran an article on it. UK woman slammed over deport non-English speaking staff at Heathrow. Hindustan Times, Times of India. Times of India ran 2 articles, actually. The Economic Times, Indian. NDTV, Connected to India. DNA, another Indian outlet. Another Indian outlet on Facebook, The Statesman. The Indian Express, all ran news coverage about Lucy White's tweet. Now, most of you wouldn't know who the hell Lucy White is before you came on here. Nice girl, rather based on migration. Why on earth is the Indian press so focused on protecting their global reputation out of a sense of, like, ethnic solidarity with random Indians in their diaspora overseas? And it's because they need to maintain a tripwire around whether or not Indians are integrating successfully into our civilizations and what integration actually means, so that nobody revisits the settlement of importing hundreds of thousands of Indians into the Anglosphere, allowing them to send money back from our economies to India, and dispersing their troublesome excess male population around the world to keep political stability for the Modi regime. Why are we allowing this? Why are we allowing Indian propaganda to attack our countrymen? We shouldn't be doing this. This should have been an international incident, and a cause for the complete suspension of all visas in India. For a English woman to say, I expect English to be spoken in my airport, and I expect my airport, which has had lots of security measures imposed upon the native population because a few Muslims hijacked a few planes and blew them into buildings in 2001, and now we have to suffer the indignity of being excessively security searched by people of foreign diaspora speaking a foreign language, which somehow isn't the security concern. When she complains about that, the Indian press descend upon her. Why is this not a prompt to say, well, hang on a minute, if you're just going to attack our countrymen for saying speak our language in our country, maybe we shouldn't be permitting you in here? This should have prompted a flood of apologies from the Indian press. But it didn't. Oh, one last thing, by the way, before I move on. There was this delusional post after the Usha Vance thing that Sarah Stock pointed out. There are Indians that think that the Bible demands Christians to convert or offer the conversion or death to Hindus. It's like, that's not in there. Are you confusing us with Islam? I understand why Hindus and Muslims might have a long-running feud in India. See India-Pakistan and their various border ceremonies, or see the creation of Sikhism out of the various bloody feuds between Hindus and Muslims in India. But just, this is all mental. Absolutely mental. And so why are we permitting these people entry into our civilization if they don't like us this much? If they just want to use our democratic systems and our economies to the home advantage? I don't think this is very sensible. So, okay, let's say this is just a problem with Indian diasporas, with Indian migrants. What about well-naturalized second generation, first generation immigrants who love the country, have assimilated, know all of the American values off by heart? Let's talk about Vivek Ramaswamy, because he's currently running for governor of Ohio. And the residents of Ohio deserve a lot better than someone who crashed out over Christmas by insulting American culture. In defense of H-1B visas, Vivek famously said, "The reason top tech companies often hire foreign-born and first-generation engineers over native," air quotes, oh, there's no such thing as a native American. Weird how he's pretending that there is no such thing as an American heritage, founding stock. That, of course, Vivek Ramaswamy is as American as George Washington. An argument he'll make based on values. Native Americans isn't because of an innate American IQ deficit, a lazy and wrong explanation. A key part of it comes down to the C word, culture. Tough questions demand tough answers. If we're really serious about fixing the problem, we have to confront the truth. Our American culture has venerated mediocrity over excellence for way too long, at least since the 90s and likely younger. That doesn't start in college, it starts young. A culture that celebrates the prom queen over the math Olympiad champ, or the jock over the valedictorian, will not produce the best engineers. Jocks and football captains lead the teams. The nerds are the intellectual horsepower that they harness, but who do not lead from the front. The jock should be leading the nerds. You should probably be a combination at best. If you can read books and lift weights, you've probably got a good advantage. But there's a reason why the football captain going out with the captain of the cheerleading squad is basically a picture of the American dream, right? It's because often, despite them being split up into stereotypes by popular culture, actually, the guys who compete at high levels in athletics are often rather intelligent as well. They are all-star athletes, and they also perform pretty well in academics. And they are the backbone of American civilization. So to denigrate these people, to say that instead you need to be a nation of subcontinental strivers, rote learning from maths textbooks, programming at all hours of the day, like spreadsheet-filling bugmen, very insulting to American culture. Almost prioritizing sort of Indian striver culture over American, despite positioning himself throughout the 2024 election campaign and since as dedicated to American values. He says, more movies like Whiplash, fewer reruns of Friends. Bear in mind, Whiplash, the point of it was that the guy couldn't maintain a healthy relationship because he was so dedicated to drumming and having abuse hurled at him by his teacher that he went basically insane. Not a very healthy example. More math tutoring, fewer sleepovers. More weekend science competitions, fewer Saturday morning cartoons. More books, less TV. I agree with that. More creating, less chilling. More extracurriculars, less hanging out at the mall. It turns out that just creating a civilization full of widget makers does not build a culture. Actually, sleepovers, Saturday morning cartoons, depending on how nourishing their content is, actually forms your character. You need to imbibe narratives, you need to learn virtues, you need to test your moral mettle against others to be a well-rounded person and a custodian of a culture. What Vivek is doing is basically creating like an insect hive capable of filling out Excel spreadsheets, and that's just not America. That's not what makes America excellent. Why did he feel the need to attack American culture in order to justify H-1B visas? Could it be because H-1B visas overwhelmingly benefit Indians? Very strange. He's saying, that's the work we have cut out for us, rather than wallowing in victimhood and just wishing or legislating alternative hiring practices into existence. I'm confident that we can do it. So in the meantime of turning American culture into a battery farm for global anywheres that can work in endless tech companies, being monkeys tapping out the works of Shakespeare on typewriters and never actually inventing anything new, in the meantime, keep importing thousands of Indians to fill those jobs. Having a downward pressure on housing, terraforming American culture. Curious, that. $10 super chat. So let me get this straight. The diasporic continent with massive IQ thinks it's a good idea to antagonize Ohio man's marriage until he is left with no option. I'm not going to read out that last bit. That is almost indecipherable internet speak, sir. I really should read these before I read them out, shouldn't I? Anyway, so this sort of cottoned people on to Vivek's act. The mask slipped somewhat, and the mask has slipped for a few people recently, including Dinesh D'Souza. But what's curious is Vivek has admitted that he wasn't born to American citizens. He is a first-generation immigrant who took advantage of America's birthright citizenship laws. So he's just as American as you and me, but his own parents aren't even legal American, or they weren't legal American citizens. Lived in America for 40 years and isn't a citizen. In his own words, by the way.
I believe in being consistent about my policies where...
So your father is not a citizen of the United States?
He's not.
Okay. And your mother, when did your mom take the citizenship test? Was it before or after you were born?
After I was born.
After you were born. Okay.
After years of being in this, following the legal process of becoming a naturalized citizen, she followed it through the legal process. And
so
I think
you gained citizenship through birthright then?
Well, but you gain citizenship through birthright citizenship in that sense too, right? I mean, every American. So what I want to do is revive a vision of citizenship where every kid who enjoys...
I'm sorry, just to backtrack. So your father is not a citizen,
They came to this country legally. I believe in being consistent.
They came to the country legally, but they weren't citizens when you were born here. So, Vivek, using a term that Trump has used before, is an anchor baby. And he is lecturing heritage Americans on whether or not they are native, and what their culture actually means, and why it's bad, and why he should be the one to tell them how to fix it by doing more math Olympiads. Basically being Steve Urkel from Saved by the Bell. Do you understand how this, the girl that asks Vance questions, etc., is not doing wonders for the reputation of Indians, who again can be very nice people, and instead it comes across as ethnically collectivist and patronizing. And so, this as a PR strategy, as well as the obvious exploitation by the H-1 visa system by Indians, as well as the siphoning off of remittances, as well as Indians being the #1 perpetrators of sex attacks in the UK, do you see how this has turned people against Indian migration? Do you see how this has been a PR disaster for Indians? And the conversation is being had because the larger the diaspora grows, the more prominent in politics they become, the more people come online, the more the ethnic and cultural tensions and the blatant economic exploitation becomes obvious to people. So Vivek has been going on tour for the Ohio governor's race, weirdly looking like he's been like bleaching his skin. He looks like Max Headroom here, or Crichton from from Red Dwarf. But anyway, this guy came up and asked how Vivek can accurately represent Americans when America is a Christian country, when Vivek isn't Christian, and when he says, starting to list his truths, that God is real, but he isn't referring to the Christian God, he doesn't believe in the divinity of Christ, and therefore isn't actually supporting the roots of all the values that he claims are sacred and superior that built America. And yet again, Vivek tries to crowbar his Hindu identity into America. And what people are starting to sense is just an insincerity about this, right? It's the rather insulting meme of, let me explain to you how your identity includes me. Actually, it doesn't. Actually, people feel that it doesn't represent them. And so, as we'll look at the polling shortly, they're acting on that lack of representation, and Vivek is likely to lose the governor's race as a Republican in Ohio, a deeply red state.
No question. It's allowed. So based on what the press says about your beliefs, you call yourself a Hindu, but you also call yourself Christian.
I don't call myself Christian. I call myself a Hindu.
Okay. So based on what the Turning Point's values are, which is Christianity, I'm a little confused on why you believe in I don't know. Wouldn't it be logical to conclude that a monotheistic organization would be more, I don't know, I guess I just don't understand why I guess a polytheistic ideology would support some sort of, I guess, monotheistic perspective which Christianity is. So I guess I'm wondering why you have Christian values in that way.
Sure. Happy to address that. What's your name, sir?
Liam Birmingham.
Liam. So tell me about what you know about Hinduism.
Hinduism is a polytheistic religion that.
So with due respect, I'll just cut in right there because there's one thing I have a little bit of authority on. I'm actually a monotheist. I believe there's one true God. It's from the Vedanta tradition of Advaita philosophy, not stuff that we need to spend a ton of time here on. But since you asked about it, I wanted to address it. I believe there's one true God. Now let me just ask you, because I know that may be a hard thing to process. What's your faith?
I'm a Christian. I'm a follower of Jesus.
Great. Do you believe in the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit?
I think a lot of people here do. So
good. And that doesn't make you a polytheist, does it?
Probably not. No.
Great. Because I think this is it's a great spiritual question. There's good dialogue here. Is every religion has its reconciling of the one and the many. And so in my faith, I believe there's one true God. He resides in all of us, and he appears in different forms, but it's one true God. So I'm an ethical monotheist. That's the way I would describe my faith. Now, I will tell you, I'm not running to be pastor of Ohio. I'm running to be governor of Ohio, and I didn't run to be pastor of America. I ran to be president of the United States of America. Can I ask you a question in response? Because I love dialogue like this.
Sure, yeah.
Do you think it's inappropriate for someone who's a Hindu to be, say, a U.S. president?
No, I think it's... No, well...
You be honest.
Isn't Hinduism... Well, I mean, I can ask yourself that Hinduism believes in Shiva and, what is it? The flute god? I forget.
So, I'm just going to cut in because this well-meaning autistic gentleman, one of us, I'm sure, sort of stumbles a little bit. He should have picked up on the fact that Vivek tried to, I think quite subversively, redefine Christianity as a monotheistic religion by the standard of considering Hinduism a monotheistic religion. The point in Christianity is that if you consider the parts of the Trinity to have a different nature than being the one true God, that's a form of heresy. So, I mean, that argument was settled hundreds of years ago in the early Christian church with various sects meeting the sharp end of a sword for saying otherwise. So, the idea that, Jesus Christ, as well as the Father and the Holy Spirit, is equivalent to Vishnu or Ganesh or who's the one that lives in cow dung? it's like Lakshmi or something, where they smear it all over the houses. The idea that you can say, well, this thing has a tripartite nature, and therefore, which is also one nature, and this one god also manifests in all sorts of other strange, culturally particular incarnations. Therefore, Hinduism is just as American as Christianity. Nope. Sorry. Christianity doesn't believe in reincarnation, it doesn't produce the caste system, it produces completely different civilizations to India. And there are Indian Christians, and again, they're nice people, and it would be very nice if Kerala was more representative of the whole of India, but unfortunately it's not. And so people kind of smell a rat when you try to redefine their identity to make room for yours, when you don't actually share the heritage of America, be it religious or even an ethnic identity, which lots of Indians in politics seem to identify strongly with, and as a reflex, attack settled American identity when Indian culture is questioned, insulted, or even documented, it turns out. So, Vivek also keeps getting questions like this. There was one where a young chap asked, how can you be representative of American Christians, especially at Turning Point with Charlie Kirk, God rest him, known for his evangelism? How can you represent this organization? How can you represent the Republican Party? How can you represent the American people when you don't believe in Christianity? And Vivek said, well, you know, Thomas Jefferson was a deist, Benjamin Franklin was of Quaker heritage, but he's likely an atheist considering the language he edited in the Declaration of Independence. You know, that means, therefore, that not all the Founding Fathers were proper Christians or not even had the same Christian denomination. Therefore, Hinduism is just as American as apple pie. And again, I don't think the Founding Fathers had Hinduism in mind when they were writing the Declaration of Independence or the Bill of Rights. And I don't think, I'm not trying to insult him, I don't think the Founding Fathers would recognize Vivek as an American. They would be very confused about this man who is walking around saying that he is in the continuity of the Founding Fathers' spirit, despite believing nothing, none of the foundations and faith, or the beliefs that they held. He shares nothing in common with them, so they would be very mystified as to why this is the case. So Vivek recently tweeted out, end identity politics. Okay. Sure. What about for Indians? Because Vivek then responded to the seismic losses of the Republican Party across various races the other week, when in the run-up to an election, the Republicans were very busy calling one another Nazis, and therefore gave the impression their party are Nazis, and therefore caused a swing towards the Democrats, despite the Democrats being in total disarray, incredibly unpopular, and incapable of fielding a competent candidate. But, you know, the Republicans ran Winsome Sears in Virginia, so what did you expect but a loss? Anyway, so they lost in a bunch of governor's races. They lost in mayoral races. And Vivek responded to this. Well, I'll let him speak for himself.
We got our asses handed to us in New Jersey, Virginia, and New York City. Democrats swept all three. There's two key lessons for Republicans. Listen carefully. Number one, our side needs to focus on affordability. Make the American dream affordable. Bring down costs, electric costs, grocery costs, healthcare costs, and housing costs.
Do you know how to do that? Stop importing loads of H-1B Indians that put a lot of pressure on the job market and housing. But anyway...
and lay out how we're going to do it. And number two, cut out the identity politics. It doesn't suit Republicans. It's not for us. That's the woke left's game, not ours. We don't care about the color of your skin or your religion. We care about the content of your character. That's who we are. We got our...
Don't care about the color of your skin or your religion. Well, it turns out that your religion actually forms the content of your character, and this is why countries that practice different religions than Christianity have reliably different characters to Christian nations. So we can judge the content of people's characters on the whole and often find them wanting, as we'll get onto with the civic sense later. Someone super chatted in, sorry, Vivek, if monotheism were a religious and cultural panacea, then India would have no religious strife. Oh, wait. Yeah, quite. And we'd have no religious strife between different sects of Indians and their diasporas in our respective countries. You know, for example, the Hindus and Muslims fighting over a Leicester cricket game, before. So, Vivek, despite saying that we should have no identity politics, his software hasn't quite updated, because when he was asked why Mamdani had 62% of the foreign-born vote in New York City, Vivek said, well, what surprises me is a lot of the people that come, whether they're Latino, you think about people from Muslim, Jewish, or Hindu backgrounds, they should, in theory, according to their own religious values, be conservatives. Yes, Vivek, they're very conservative about their own ethnic group and religious tradition, which means they're going to vote for the guy that promises to take white people's stuff and give it to them. This is very conservative to vote for the racial socialist because they are conserving their own ethnic in-group interests. This is what you get when you have a liberal pluralist country that imports lots of tribal diasporas from around the world who continue to practice their tribalism in various enclaves, and then you have a supposedly colorblind meritocratic movement that says we don't care about your religion or the color of your skin. But it turns out that lots of other cultures care about the color of your skin and ethnicity more than the individualistic English Anglo-Protestant culture in our countries. And also, the idea that your religion doesn't matter when it is about your deeply held metaphysical convictions about the nature of good and evil, the universe, life, death, and reincarnation, the idea that doesn't matter is why you can't understand why these various groups don't vote along issue-based lines. It's what Roger Scruton said about the pre-political identity, the we. You need to settle that we before you can talk as a community about which infrastructure projects or energy ventures that you need to focus on. And the problem that you have under Vivek's brand of American values conservatism is that you could import the entire population of India and they could still be Hindu, but as long as they work really, really hard, they would be American by his definition. As long as they practice the colorblind values of the Constitution, which Vivek believes are implied somewhere in there between the penumbras, then they could all be American, no matter how much like India America would begin to look, because of course they're still practicing Hindus, they're still celebrating Diwali, and they are all Indian. And so, this account responded saying, he's promoting the delusional magic dirt theory that ideology is about civicness, that migrants will be conservative in spirit because they will hold conservative values, like family values. Whose family? Religion. Whose religion? Hard work. Okay. For what? Like, where is the money going? What's it being spent on? Which country is it being sent back to? It says, in reality, they're only conservative when they live in their own nations because ideology is, and always has been, about ethnic group interests. This is why the individualistic Anglo cultures produce liberalism, which is universal, because universality, extending moral consideration outside your family and your in-group, is basically English tribalism. But we just didn't recognize it. And so Vivek is doing a great job cosplaying as an individualistic liberal, but his ideology leads to importing far more of the tribal diasporas from around the world, which then results in ethnic protectionism and the election of candidates like Zoran Mamdani, rather than the small, limited government, constitutional conservative Republicans that Vivek stands alongside and claims to support. Now, is this assimilation? I would ask Vivek, because, of course, he's a Hindu. Does he think this is a good idea? Does he think that building a giant statue to a monkey god in the middle of North Carolina is a great idea? I know there's one that went up in Texas, right? There's various towns that have been taken over by the Muslim call to prayer, like Dibble, Michigan, or the new Somali enclave in Minnesota, where now various clans are actually voting against a Somali candidate because of an ancient tribal blood feud. Is this integration? I'm sure some of those guys work really, really hard. They're devoted to their families. In fact, many of the Somali clans are very close-knit families. Ask Ilhan Omar. I'm sure that, they practice their religion. Never mind what religion it is. We don't care, right? No. Religions are the foundation of city-states from antiquity because they come out of the customs and traditions practiced by families, by people. They come from the rituals of ancestor worship at the hearth. They are the confederation of tribes. And so, yes, your religion matters because it is downstream of the people to whom it is most intuitive. And therefore Christianity matters because it is intuitive to the American people. Yeah, sorry, I just thought this tweet was hilarious from Logan. You mean foreigners showed up here and immediately started supporting their own group interests and weren't interested in vague ideological appeals to free markets in the Constitution? Wow, I'm shocked. So, Vivek then said, what is an American?
25. It means we still believe in those ideas. So what does it mean to be an American in the year 2025? It means we still believe in those ideals of 1776. It means we believe in merit, that the best person gets the job, regardless of their genetics. That you are judged not on the color of your skin, but on the content of your character and your contributions. It means we believe in the rule of law. And I say this as the proud son of legal immigrants to the United States. That means your first act of entering this country cannot break the law. It means we believe in free speech and open debate without censorship. Whether you're Nick Fuentes or Alex Jones or Jimmy Kimmel, it means that words are not violence, that violence is violence, and violence is never an acceptable response to words. It's not just about our constitutional principles. Thank you. That's America. That's who we are.
The ideals of 1776 weren't liberal colorblindness, and Martin Luther King was not a founding father. Again, this all reads as very unauthentic, just sort of like crowbarring yourself into the American tradition, and so people can kind of smell in authenticity here, especially after you've already insulted and denigrated American culture in order to promote, mind you, more importing of Indians via H-1B visas, because that was the entire point of Vivek denigrating American culture to then say, aren't Indians more industrious? We should keep bringing them in. And so he's losing the Ohio governor's race as things poll. This is in a fairly safe red seat, and it's because people can kind of see that white working class Christian conservatives who voted MAGA are not represented by Hindu anchor babies from India who denigrate their culture in order to import more Indians. So maybe the Republican Party should learn a lesson to, one, stop the mass influx of Indian cheap workers via H-1Bs, and also not put in cosplay Americans as candidates in their safe seats that they could then lose. So the reason I bring this up is because this post was shared by Gabe Guidjirani, who is a patriot. He works for Turning Point, I believe now. And he unshared it when lots of people pointed out that they're not big fans of Vivek, because the comments under this are not exactly kind. Gabe was recently insulted by Dinesh D'Souza, because Gabe had said, what did the Reagan generation actually conserve? And Dinesh D'Souza names him and says that he's going to wipe the arrogant smile off of Gabe's face. Gabe points out that, winning the Cold War was, yes, a consequence of Reagan's diplomacy, but of course the Soviet Union were exhausting their own treasury by their terrible Marxist economic policies. The idea that America has retained its #1 position in the world, 1, at what cost? 2, China is starting to outpace it. 3, Americans are having sub-replacement birth rates. Abortions are at a record high. They're on the brink of civil strife because left keeps assassinating the right and doing property damage and not being imprisoned for it, and the right just want to have conversations, and yet are engaged in a circular firing squad about who is and isn't allowed in the movement. And then free markets, yet again, outsourcing America's manufacturing capacity, but also forcing Americans to compete with the global labor market to then import lots of cheap Indian labor, which is something that Dinesh is quite keen on, actually. Now, Dinesh is insistent that MAGA can win the American Indian vote because Indian Americans believe in merit and free markets. Then why do so many of them keep hiring other Indians? Because lots of them believe in ethnic nepotism as well. They're socially and culturally to the right of evangelical Christians, yes, for their own families. They oppose illegal immigration, but they want mass legal migration. So why drive Indian Americans out of the GOP with vicious, dumb, unnecessary smears? Well, as someone pointed out to Vivek, 270,000 Indians voted for Trump in 2024, so Indian support would need to increase by 45 points just to match a 1-point increase among white voters. So Indian support for MAGA is nothing more than a rounding error. And this is the case in the UK as well. Rishi Sunak in 2014 wrote a paper for Policy Exchange, I think it was, encouraging the Conservative Party to import more Indians because they vote Conservative more often than other minorities. They still overwhelmingly vote for Labour, but to court the Indian vote, the Conservatives have basically set up various Sikh and Indian Hindu lobby groups, where Kemi Badenoch goes to Diwali events, and multiple candidates signed a Sikh and Hindu manifesto at the last election, promising to import the elderly relatives of more Hindus. So the political trade-off to court this vote is just not worth it, actually. We don't need hundreds of thousands more Indian migrants in the UK, US, or Australia just to demographically gerrymander our own electoral systems. But this was the worst thing that Dinesh did in the last week. So Tyler Oliviera, when he said that he wasn't going to put out his Indian video and then ended up doing so, Dinesh, who has been against identity politics, much like Vivek, ever since the 90s when he wrote the book The End of Racism and insulted Sam Francis and got him fired from National Review, calling him a white nationalist, or a white supremacist, or a racist. I can't remember the exact charge, so do correct me. But Dinesh, champion of colorblind individualism, then decided to dive, a bit like a poo, in front of the bullet being fired at India's reputation by Tyler Oliviera just going to India and filming the poop-throwing festival. Dinesh says, how about commenting on this festival? It seems like the future belongs to the poop throwers. How weird. Why would a niche Indian festival that is objectively disgusting about consuming and throwing around cow excrement solicit such a defensive reaction from Dinesh D'Souza, the arch opponent of identity politics? Like, he recently said identity politics is part of a strategy to undermine a free society. Okay, why are you playing Indian identity politics, Dinesh? Why is it a reflex, the likes of Vivek and Dinesh, to insult native American culture and their work ethic? Why do they say we shouldn't have identity politics, but then immediately defend Indian culture? And the moment people say, well, maybe we shouldn't have so many H-1B visas from India, they go, whoa, 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 whoa. Well, Americans, they're not earning enough. Their education system isn't training the right bright minds to fill the economy. We need to import lots more Indians. Someone from $5 said, Reagan also a massive gun control, mass amnesty, and he was progenitor of no-fault divorce when he signed it into law in California as governor. Yes, lots of people are revisiting the Reagan settlement and have seen that his legacy has been a disaster on immigration, constitutional freedoms, and the integrity of the family. And so, if those carrying the torch for his legacy are going to be like Dinesh D'Souza, who have been championing the fact that minorities are getting ahead in America, that racism is a canard. And bear in mind, look, in 2017, when I got properly into politics, I was watching a lot of, Young American Foundation campus tours, and I watched a lot of Dinesh's stuff. And this was back during the stage when, the left are the real racists, the parties didn't switch sides, the Democrats are still the party, the KKK, keeping minorities down, but minorities don't need help from the Democrats, it's patronizing the Republicans, the true party of opportunity. Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves, don't forget. That sort of rhetoric was, cutting through to a lot of people. That rhetoric all seems like bullshit now, when you seem to run defense for Indians throwing turds in a random rural village as if you have been personally slighted. It's a really weird thing to do, Dinesh, and it seems to undercut your credibility for many years on this issue. As this account that I follow, which puts out bangers, says, Dinesh spent decades posturing as a race-blind Christian conservative, invoking Reagan conservatism and age seniority, and the moment H-1B immigration receives pushback, he becomes an outright ethno-nationalist. Forget, but I think it's James Kirkpatrick on X that says, everyone's a blood and soil nationalist for somewhere. Turns out we found out what Dinesh's was. Now, people then began insulting him. And he said, I don't think these losers understand how I react to this abuse. I react in the way the Duke of Kent would react to the cotterwooling of a street heckler. I don't seek a duel, I'm simply entertained by the stupidity. My wife tells me I enjoy these plebeian tantrums way too much. Immediately starts tweeting like an 18th century English aristocrat. And then he says, oh, I was being sarcastic. So immediate pivot to try to regain credibility. Tyler Oliviera was not so forgiving. He says, unprovoked, your response to my family and I being doxxed, threatened, and harassed by Indian nationalists infuriated by my documentation of a poop-throwing festival was not sympathy as a fellow American. You posted a screenshot of median household income of Asian households earning more than white American households. Who does that? It gives the impression that all you see is GDP. Actually, I think it gives the impression that Dinesh does have ethnic solidarities, but they don't lie with the American people, with heritage Americans. If you believed in colorblind American solidarity, then why is your first instinct to defend anonymous Indians threatening to abuse his imaginary sister and mother with a screenshot of household income stats among ethnic groups in America? Why are identity politics convenient for you, but not for anyone else? Are you Indian, Indian American? American? Is America simply an economic expansion zone, ripe for blundering? Are you loyal to America first and foremost? And this is the question being raised, which is, you can preach identity politics and meritocratic colorblindness all you like, but when the chips are down and the avenue to import hundreds of thousands of Indians to advantage India via living bridges, to send remittances back to India, when that is threatened, suddenly the champions of meritocratic colorblindness of Indian heritage in the Republican Party insult Americans and their culture, and say and imply America isn't good enough, they actually need H-1B visas to survive. Sorry, don't think it's worth the trade. He then points out, why do you take such joy in Americans concerned for the future of America as we import more H-1B slaves to replace them? Almost sounds as if you want to turn America into India. And this is after this chap says the American dream is dead, nobody's coming to save us, about the fact that average age of home ownership is 40, that there are 50-year mortgages, that they're being shut out of jobs in their own country. Dinesh says, practical suggestion, maybe if you put on a clean shirt and remove your baseball cap, you might qualify for a well-paying job in one of those factories Trump talks about. Again, what's with the need to constantly insult Americans? Not necessary. And then, just when I came on, I was loading this stream up, Dinesh then said, how ironic it will be if a brown American like Vivek actually helps to fix education and raise the prospect of white kids, while all the professional whiteys on X continue their idle boasting about how they could get us to the moon just like some white guys did in 1969. That's a lot of racial animus. Why? Because bear in mind, nobody provoked Dinesh. It's not like people were being really, really mean and insulting to Dinesh. Dinesh had a lot of people's esteem for a while because he challenged the 2020 election narrative. And look, I haven't seen this film, I can't comment on the veracity of his claims, but he at least put his head above the parapet when it was unpopular to do so on behalf of President Trump. So people who trusted the plan appreciated Dinesh's efforts. They didn't like the fact that he was sent to prison under the Obama administration for a minor campaign violation. People overlooked the cancellation of San Francis in the 90s, which, in hindsight, not a good idea. So why does he feel the need to attack whiteys? It seems like a mosque slip. And so it gives people cause for pessimism if the ambassadors for colorblind meritocratic integration and arguing Indians are a model minority in America, who are saying this is the reason we need more H-1Bs, seem to possess a reflexive racial animus towards white Americans, on the basis that some guy went and filmed Indians throwing poo in a random village. That has nothing to do with you if you are just as American as them. Very weird. Another person guilty of this in the Trump administration, Harmeet Dillon. In 2021, she tweeted, seriously, if it weren't for Sikh truckers, y'all would eating grass right now. Trucking is the #1 industry to employ non-college educated American men. Why does this need to be outsourced to a Sikh cartel? Why does Harmeet Dillon feel the need to constantly come to the defense of Sikh truckers, including after, might I add, an illegal immigrant Sikh trucker killing 3 people on a Florida highway by performing an illegal U-turn? Got to pause that there because we can't play the footage of people dying. So this illegal immigrant in question failed road test signs, failed an English language test, and got licenses from 2 sanctuary states. Now, this is Harjinder Singh. He answered just 2 of 12 questions correctly when being tested for English by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration after the April 12th crash. When asked to read highway signs, he could only identify one of 4 signs shown to him, according to the US Department of Transportation. Why was he in the country? Believed to have entered the US illegally in 2018. So even under the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, this wasn't even a Biden guy. Why was he here? So, because of his negligence, because of his recklessness, he killed 3 people. And what was curious is the global Indian diaspora, both in America and around the world, came to his defense. Lots of Indians recording videos saying, oh, please, he didn't mean it. He seeks your forgiveness. Please grant him forgiveness. It was a mistake. It was a one-off. It was an accident. Now, if a white guy did this, I'd be calling for him to be hanged. Because I don't feel the need to protect people that share my ethnicity just because they share my ethnicity. Funnily enough, I actually do take the judgment of content of character rather than color of skin very seriously. Just so happens I find lots of people's character wanting. But here, seeks for justice, said, oh, he's grieving, he's praying, he's very sorrowful. Basically, please don't persecute him. Do you know 2.5 million people, Indians, signed a petition supporting him? What do you do with that? What do you do with a culture that says it doesn't matter if you kill someone through negligence, if you broke into a country, if you are remorseless about killing those people, judging by the video footage where he's just sort of got a dead-eyed stare after causing 3 deaths. Never mind that. He's one of my people, therefore we can just make excuses for it. And part of the reason is, of course, because the immediate consequence of this is that lots of Indians were shut out of the trucking industry, which was another avenue for Indian migration and remittances. More than 7,200 commercial truck drivers in the US were barred from operating after they failed newly enforced English proficiency tests, which were then brought in after Mr. Singh caused the crash. Indian origin and Latino drivers are among the worst hit, and of course this is another Indian outlet, the Economic Times. And this follows another crash that happened in California. Now, the Californian crash was alleged to be under the influence of drugs. He then had a drug test, and it turns out that he wasn't. He was just completely inconsiderate and unfit for being on the road. As if not being under the influence of drugs somehow makes it better with the fact that you resulted in people dying. So, what I found encouraging was that there are members in the Trump administration that care about this. Senator Marco Rubio, of course, paused the issuance of all worker visas for commercial truck drivers. There shouldn't have been a single one anyway, because it's the lead employer of American men out of high school. The increasing number of foreign drivers operating large tractor-trailer trucks on US roads is endangering American lives and undercutting the livelihoods of American truckers. This is America First. This is MAGA. This was in August. This was before the second crash. The second crash being in California, for whom the family of the perpetrator, alleged perpetrator, came out and gave interviews to the Indian press. And some of the things that they said was just crazy, right? The family of the 21-year-old Indian origin driver who crashed his semi-truck, killing 3 people in California, say they feel vindicated after authorities confirmed he was not driving intoxicated when his vehicle met the accident. Jasanpreet Singh from Yuba City was arrested under suspicion of driving under the influence and charged with vehicular manslaughter, with gross negligence as well as DUI causing injury. A woman and 2 children were killed. Speaking to the Indian Express, Jashanpreet's father, Ravinder Singh, said, "Our son is a true Sikh. He has never touched drugs. These allegations were false. We said it from the very first day. Now, official reports have confirmed our faith in our son. He is a baptized Sikh. Because of him, my wife and I also took Amrit. He is very disciplined and went to the United States 3 years ago in search of a better future, of which he seems to have robbed from a woman and 2 children. Now we are devastated. I request everyone not to spread false claims that he was under the influence. I hope he will get justice." I hope he will get justice, as if he is the victim here. How do you accommodate a culture that is ethnically clannish and tries to make excuses for their children, their co-ethnics, members of their religion, when they have committed atrocities, rather than condemning them on an individual basis, rather than judging them on the content of their character, rather than the color of their skin? You can't. It doesn't belong. So yes, Vivek, you do actually have to care about the religion, and when you say that you don't, it sounds like you're making wiggle room, making an ideological justification for H-1Bs existing as a way to mass import Indians into the United States to benefit India. So, we would think, again, Trump administration, against identity politics, for meritocracy, and these are indefensible, right? These are totally indefensible, avoidable atrocities where people have died, never needed to happen. And so everyone should be on board with Marco Rubio rescinding these visas for Sikh truckers. And then Harmeet Dillon comes back in October, after the California one and the Florida one, and says, Many of you have probably seen the news in the last few months of 2 illegal aliens causing horrific tragedies on American roadways while behind the wheel of large commercial trucks. It says that they got licenses in California due to the state's illegal alien sanctuary laws. This should never have happened. Totally agree. We must ensure that American drivers can read and communicate in English for public safety. Yeah, but they're not American drivers. They never would be American drivers. They're Indians. So they didn't need to be there. They didn't need to be taking American jobs. Those responsible for these tragedies must be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, and the systems in place that allow these illegal aliens to enter our country and get behind the wheel of these dangerous machines must be completely overhauled. Unfortunately, in the fog of outrage, some are using these tragedies as an opportunity to attack law-abiding Sikhs and Indian origin drivers simply because of who they are. Many of these law-abiding Sikhs and Indian origin Americans are hardworking and patriotic. Most were born here or immigrated lawfully. Yet again, when an Indian national does something that people disagree with, another Indian, who is meant to be as American as you, leaps in to defend her co-ethnics or people who share her religion. Because remember, Harmy Dillon gave that strange devotional to Waheguru at the 2024 Republican convention, where J.D. Vance got the VP nomination. And at the time, like, Matt Walsh was bodied for saying, why are we doing this? America's a Christian country. Why are we having devotionals to, like, pagan gods and Indian tribal customs at our party convention? And people were going, wow, you're a bigot, you need to build a broad tent. Sorry, but I don't think we should be building a broad tent, or definitely not giving important appointments in the administration to people who feel the need to consistently excuse not just the system by which trucking jobs are replaced by non-Americans, but to prioritize not causing offense to Indians when 2 Indians get behind the wheel of the truck and kill multiple families. Especially when, and look, I don't think you should be insulting to people on the grounds of their race, their ethnicity, well, you should insult religions if you don't like them. They deserve scrutiny. But we shouldn't have arbitrary bigotry for people, right? Again, judge people by the content of their character. Just so happens that many nations produce people whose characters are wanting. However, in the context of the statements made by Indians around the world, excusing these crimes, this is egregious. And I point this out because it turns out the victims of the Florida crash ended up being Haitians, right? So there are so many immigrants in America now from the Third World that you're getting Third Worlders killing other Third Worlders. But never mind the fact that these people, none of the people in the incident, never needed to be in the country in the first place to have had this atrocity happen. It's of course appalling that anyone dies, any innocent person, no matter their ethnic background. And so, prayers go to the family that were killed. Absolutely. But, when the Indians thought they were white, as I've screenshotted here, this was just one of the many examples. There were lots of memes made about killing Wignats, or the wrong U-turn but the right outcome, because they thought they were killing white people. It was only when it was revealed to be Haitian family that these were hurriedly deleted. And this was deleted. I had screenshotted it at a time. So, there is a strong sense of ethnic contempt coming from the country that supplies the vast majority of American H-1B visas. Why would you want people in that country? It can manifest in a kind of passive-aggressive way, with the woman lecturing the vice president, or Vivek and Dinesh saying that America is insufficiently striverish in its culture, or it can be outright malicious with various Indians who have learned to use X in the last year or so, who are insulting white people, who are calling them all fat and lazy and sex pests, a lot of projection going on there, and are gloating when they think white people have been killed by an Indian. Sorry, there is no making peace and incorporating this culture. It is vicious, because I do not gloat when Indians die in disasters. There was that plane disaster that happened in London recently, and a bunch of people died, and they were predominantly Indian. Yeah, tragic. Like, sorry, I don't want bereaved families. We shouldn't gloat in the death of innocent people just because they don't share our ethnicity or even our religion. Like, we should pray for their conversion, not for their demise. But instead, that is not the case in ethnically clannish cultures. Seemingly, in the country with the largest single population who are responsible for the largest waves of migration to the Anglosphere. I don't want to share a country with these people who, you know, if a family member of mine died, they would gloat because I am for immigration restriction. America shouldn't have to deal with this. This was also something. There is a pattern of Indians using violence against white people as a point of mockery. So this was the Cincinnati couple that were beaten by a crowd of black concert goers. I'm sure the New York Post would come up with a much better euphemism for it than that. This is a consistent trend. They were mocking this woman beaten unconscious by a mob in Cincinnati. They were mocking Jesus Christ, saying that he's a demon, being smacked down by a monkey god. I mean, okay, there's not a lot of respect for religions flowing back and forth here, is there, Vivek? And then they were also mocking London for having a rape reported every hour. Now, I did break bad news to Mr. Desi King here, who is a persistent account that does this, that India are the overwhelming culprits as a single nation for these avoidable sex attacks. People were saying, oh, you don't understand per capita in the comments. Right. Per capita is relevant when you are pointing out the demographics that are disproportionately responsible for a crime per their share of the population. However, every single non-native person who commits a crime never needed to be in the country in the first place. So even though Afghans and Eritreans are 20 times more likely than a British national to commit a sex crime per their share of the population, and therefore Indians are less than Afghans and Eritreans, there doesn't need to be a single Indian sex criminal in my country. And so, every instance of Indian sex crime is an atrocity committed against British people that never needed to happen. And so, gloating about how indigenous Brits are having sex crimes visited upon them, implying that it's the Brits doing it to ourselves, or implying that somehow we deserve it for administrating the empire in India and, banning practices like burning innocent widows in Sooty, there's a vindictive streak on the online ambassadors for why India is so exceptional. And then there's been this consistent trend. There's a missing link there. The consistent trend of them mocking Charlie Kirk's murder as well. This is something that Captain Dreamer has pointed out. So, again, if people are mocking the murder of the lead conservative activist, why are his fellow conservative activists at a turning point event advocating for them to import more of those people from India? Bad idea. America doesn't need it. $10. Why else do you think there's a MAGA push to the idea America is only held by corporatocracy? White people are in the way between the elite and another vacation home. I don't think the center of MAGA has an anti-white animus. I think lots of the corporate lobbyists are practicing a blank slate view of human nature. They think people are fungible economic widgets, and so they have no loyalty to any given country, and so are willing to replace the population with cheaper workforces, especially if they are basically indentured servants loyal to the corporation, so that they can maximize profits and drive down the cost of doing business. There was a perfect example of how I think the Trump administration has been ideologically captured by lobbyists. It's not just the Department of Agriculture being lobbied to ease off deportations by farm seasonal agriculture workers and illegal aliens, but also Trump recently had, was it the executive of Fannie Mae visited Mar-a-Lago with a big billboard of Franklin Roosevelt, the 30-year mortgage, and President Trump with the 50-year mortgage saying, best presidents. And Trump then put it on Truth Social. So it seems that, unfortunately, some of these policies are a direct consequence of flattery and lobbying by large corporations who use the profits that you make for them in your spreadsheet job that you just about scrape enough by to, pay for a rundown apartment in an American city surrounded by high-crime neighborhoods. They use that to then lobby politicians to bring in your replacements and displace you from your own towns and cities that you grew up in. And then when you complain to conservatives and ask for solutions, they tell you, just move somewhere more affordable. Never mind that, You know, we wouldn't have the same standard for other countries that have claims to indigeneity and long-standing land ties, and the idea that they deserve a homeland for themselves, which I think is a totally fair standard, by the way. I think that's a completely fair standard that I just want the same for America and the UK. Fortunately, we aren't extended the same consideration. Now, I want to finish on this, especially because it's getting late and I can hear my wife making dinner because I left the potatoes in the oven because I am an Englishman. Of course I'm doing potatoes. I need to make the stream shorter, don't I? I need to get the knack of timing because I only thought I was going to do like an hour and a half and it's been absolutely ages. So this guy, one of these Indian accounts, and there are a lot of high-caste educated Indians that are really frustrated by their countrymen. He complained that they need a Department of Civic Sense. I mean, just look at the way that people treat the place. And people will say, oh, you know, there's bad areas of every country. I'm sorry, but unless it's Birmingham, which is populated by people from the subcontinent, nowhere in England looked like this. It especially didn't look like this, even in the deprived northern mill towns in the 20s through the 40s. Why do people throw so much rubbish on the floor in these countries? Because let's say there isn't a vindictive ethnic streak to denigrating American culture or British culture. Let's say that mass migration isn't our strength until it's our punishment for colonization. Even the benign cultural differences result in an inferior civilization if we were just left unmolested by mass migration. Why is it that lots of Indian migrants, notably, speak constantly into speakerphone at all hours of the day? Why is it that lots of Indians in India, disrespecting their own country, which is very sad, why do they feel the need to just, and there are lots of videos like this, just throw rubbish out of trains? Like, I've seen multiple videos of, here we go, the bin is full, right? And rather than tying up the bin bag and just having a waste disposal strategy, he just opens the door and keeps throwing rubbish out. This is astounding to me. Like, we would never consider this sensible behavior because we all have to live in this civilization. For some reason, to most of the rest of the world, there's just like their home and the wilderness. But for the rest of us, because we extend moral consideration to all individuals, because we treat people as individuals, we think, oh, I wouldn't like this if this happened to me, so they probably wouldn't like it either. So I should probably put headphones in, or not throw my rubbish on the floor, or not, you know, take my shoes off and put my feet up on the train seat opposite me. But this just isn't a thing in India. Why? Now, there's a guy who did the following video that Oren McIntyre played, actually, on a stream a little while ago about the trucking accidents. And I wanted to play a quick clip of this because he explains the sort of tragedy of the Commons approach to property in India. And then I want to read a text, because in preparation for this stream, I asked a friend of mine who is Indian, comes from a Hindu family, very well educated, why he thinks this is the case. And he gave a very insightful explanation that I have screenshotted and I will just read to you.
But you know, a lot of my friends living abroad say that Indians don't have civic sense because of education. Now, near our office, everyone's obviously educated. That's why there are offices, right? And this place is dirty. So clearly it's not education. It's something else. So I found 3 interesting things of why this is happening and how it's affecting us economically and, well, just our happiness. The first one is tragedy of the commons. This is when you see someone throwing out garbage to keep his car clean or the house clean at the expense of the society.
This is a common problem with communism, by the way. Look at the Soviet Union and how they treated whaling. They would completely deplete fish supplies in various oceans, and they were responsible for the overwhelming number of whales being killed. This is why the sort of Greenpeace activism in the 20th century essentially fell on deaf ears, because they were petitioning the United Nations and exploitative capitalist nations to stop destroying natural resources in the ocean. But it turns out that the communists, who just thought all property was held in common, were the ones that were doing this, and so there wasn't any civic sense. There was a tragedy of the commons. And so this mentality happens when you don't have a long history of, 1, private property, but also extending moral consideration out beyond yourself, your family, and your clan.
humans exploit shared resources for their own benefit and basically everyone else can't use that resource, that is tragedy of the commons. And what's more shocking is that recently there was a yoga day organized in Vizag, a community event where you can come, learn yoga, perform yoga, good for your health, great for the community. But everyone did this. They ran and started stealing the yoga mats, literally snatching it from each other. But you know what's even more sad? The yoga mats were actually free anyway. So all you had to do was queue up and everything was there for you anyway. And that.
I just want to say, can we just put this guy in charge of India? Because it's like, I'm sure that it's very difficult to get ahead in a civilization where you are in the cultural minority. If, again, countries are the way they are because most people think a certain way. Most people don't think like this guy. India would be a lot nicer of a place if people with civic sense were in charge of India. That doesn't mean that we would still want millions of Indians moving to our civilization. It means that India would be a nicer place for Indians. But it's just very frustrating that, as he said, they were free. So it seems inexplicable to me as to why you would not queue up for them. As an Englishman, I don't understand it. And so I asked a friend. I'm just going to pull up the screenshots here because he explained from his personal experience having India family members what the reason behind their lack of civic sense is. I'm just going to zoom in to make sure I've got the... There we go. Okay, so he says, unfortunately, a lot of India lacks the feeling of shared responsibility, a hugely cultural problem. There is a hierarchical structure. Priest, leaders, office workers, manual workers, and street cleaners. So the caste system is still in effect. It isn't as prevalent as before, but you could argue it's being replaced by this structure. It is beneath you to actually pick up litter on the floor and put it in the bin. Let the street cleaner do it. Right, so it is a function of the caste system that you do not show your local area moral consideration, because people are born into stations where this is their job. Again, it's inconceivable to me, but it is fascinating that this is the mindset of the people that we are importing into our countries, and then we wonder why our high streets look dilapidated, why they look unfamiliar, why there's rubbish everywhere. There's no consideration engendered by this moral system. He says, I think some of that is education and upbringing. Children are not really ever taught the awareness of public conduct. In the UK, throughout school, I did litter picks. Now it's an environmental thing, but before it was just about civic responsibility over keeping your area clean. Like my dad, for example, goes along the grass verges, and if the council don't cut them, which they increasingly don't, despite our extortionate council tax, he cuts them for everyone else and he picks up litter. It's those acts of mutual consideration that keep a community together. He says, you have to remember India has had rapid urbanization without infrastructure to support it. Also, no enforcement is a huge factor. So the lack of police presence to correct this, because they don't consider it to be a crime, plus the rapid expansion of transport infrastructure and cities, has meant that the old attitudes of rural living have combined with consumerism, packaging, plastics, and densely packed urban environments to produce just waste being strewn everywhere without care. He then says, Chaltahai attitude. This is the dumbest thing, and it's one of the biggest problems. It means, like, it's okay. So it's very similar to the, as Ayan Hirsi Ali put in her book Heretic, which I covered in my video on how the third world thinks. It's very similar to the Islamic attitude of, inshallah, God wills it. You know, whatever will happen, will happen. So, you know, the future doesn't really matter. It's indeterminate. It'll be fine eventually because unseen forces will work it out. It's beyond your control. The way it's used is to accept when things are not done properly or below standards. It's used when you half-ass a job and to not strive for perfection. It's used to not give a damn about safety measures or normal procedures. Oh, Sanjay throws his garbage in the street. I'll do the same. Chalta hi. Rahul, you haven't done the fire checks for the building. Rahul's response is, it's okay. Chalta hi. The same with what Max Tempest calls the urban scarecrows now. Sort of like diminutive Indian security guards milling about at the entrance to various shops in London, while youths run in and raid it, and they go, nah, can't be helped. I'm not going to get between them and stealing. It's not like, you know, it's my job, but yeah, it doesn't really matter. says they can't blame the religion as the, I always struggle to say this, Bhagavad Gita, obviously the Hindu holy script, is all about shared responsibility. It is cultural and educational, which has been passed through generations. Some would argue it's Empire's fault. That barely makes sense, but let's give it a second. As during Empire, there was land, so wasn't there, so why would they care? The land has been there for over 80 years, and the treatment of it is horrible. You look across the continent, and Japan is a total opposite of civic responsibility. It's ingrained in them, and Japan was bombed, and most of their cities were razed to the ground, and they rapidly urbanized, and Japan has so few bins because it's the culture to take your rubbish home with you. Some will argue it's poverty, a dog-eat-dog culture. You have to be ruthless, unforgiving. In some circumstances, families can only feed one out of the two children. It creates a culture of do whatever it takes with no regard for empathy or care for others. He says, I do agree, but it's more than that. What you find is a lot of Indians, even if they're doing well and in good families, his wife's parents hate this and want to go to places where you actually care about the community. His parents, who came from not so good conditions, will tell them most horrible things that people do to survive. If they could do it to blood relatives, the rest of the country doesn't even matter. So the ruthlessness, even within Indian families, which are very close-knit, which are intergenerational, which live near each other, which is why you get that sort of constant chatter and being in communication with families. There's not a sense of inner voice or privacy because you're constantly talking to family members in your own household. If they can be ruthless to their own family members, of course they don't extend moral consideration to others. There is a tiny bit left of this, and then we will wrap up for the night, but it's just fascinating to understand why this is the case. He says, also, you have to remember, India is by nature a socialist country. It's in its constitution. So throughout its 80 years of independence, there's been a huge responsibility to government, and people believing government's job is to provide basic things. Gandhi is a legend for independence. He says rightly seen is amazing for that. I think Gandhi has lots of personal faults. But my God, post-independence, his decision set India for failure. Many such cases of the sons and daughters of empire saying, it was better when the British ran it. Generic points, weak enforcement, population's dense, socioeconomic pressures, but also a sense of familial clannishness which doesn't engender moral consideration of the outside world, and a sense of fatalism ingrained in it by, yes, the caste system, which entitles upper castes to put burdens on the lower castes to pick up after them, but also the idea that, well, it'll be fine tomorrow. It's completely indeterminate. We never know what's going to happen. So, after all this, the ethnic cartels running Silicon Valley, the excuses made for illegal Sikh truck drivers killing American citizens, the insistence on not playing identity politics by Indian heritage Republican politicians who then run to the defense of Indians and denigrate American culture anytime H-1Bs are threatened, the fact that H-1Bs are exploited by visa mills, the fact that it places downward pressure on American jobs and homes, the fact that it terraforms American culture by putting up giant Hindu monkey god statues or throwing litter everywhere, like in Indian villages. Is it really worth it? Is GDP worth it, guys? Did you vote for Donald Trump to have hundreds of thousands of H-1B visas just because you aren't highly skilled enough? I happen to think that Americans are capable of fulfilling jobs in their own country, that America is a much better country than India because they have a much better ethic, their people are better habituated, and so I think you should probably be chimping out. If you watch this entire broadcast, hey, well done to you. I'll probably make these shorter because they're kind of exhausting. But if you really care about your country, including Britain, that's suffering the same problem, including Australia, including lots of other countries, I'm sure, that have high levels of Indian migration, you should be demanding different standards. And you should be saying that actually we don't need mass legal economic migration from countries that are not culturally proximate to us. Even if there are plenty of nice people there, I'm sure. Those people can stay, and they can harness that GDP rocket fuel that they're so keen to export to us and build up their own countries. And maybe in a few hundred years, we can check in on them and see if they're doing any better. But for now, yeah, we're good, thanks. Right. Thanks very much, everyone. Can't keep my wife waiting for dinner any longer. In future, I'll be doing shorter streams. But hope you all have a good week. Go and check out Liam Tuff's channel, because I've just had a long interview published with him there about Islam and immigration. Go and check out Will Kingston's Fire at Will podcast. I've just had a conversation with him. On the weekend, we'll have another episode of Across the Pond, both on Saturday and Sunday, on the Timcast channel, and I'm appearing on Dan Wootton Outspoken tomorrow at 5 o'clock. I'm trying to get the message out as much as I can, do as much broadcasting, take as many opportunities as I can, because, I don't know, I've been racked by a real sense of that things aren't going right at the moment, and so I need to redouble my efforts, because things are feeling pretty bleak over in my country. The vibes are off, as a good friend recently said to me. And so if I can help out in any way I can, I will. And I've not got a lot of time off at the moment, but it feels like if I do take time off, I'm letting people down. So I hope this was useful. I hope it was entertaining, at least, and I hope that you were duly informed about something that you didn't realize before. Stay safe, God bless, take care, and goodbye.